colon, do you see a lot for breast cancer?
No, this panel is run for all cancer types, really. We have a separate panel. The only separate panel that we really have is for hematologic malignancies, because there the mutations are somewhat different in the genes of interest. So there's sort of a heme panel that's a different capture mode, different genes that are on it. But for the solid tumor panel that we run, it's the same for pretty much all solid tumors. And so it's the same assay that's being used for colon as well as lung, breast. You pick it, basically, kidney cancers, bladder cancers. It's just that obviously the mutations you pick up are obviously going to be specific somewhat to the disease you study. But so we sort of moved away from really targeted assaying. The only other routine assay I would think that's now really picking up is more around translocations and fusion events. And again, they occur rather rarely and more commonly in sarcomas, but there are certain fusion events that occur in multiple solid tumors. And for that, we have sort of an RNA-seq-based assay, or again, it's based on a commercial platform, Archer, where and the assay is called FusionPlex, where there's certain fusion events picked up at the RNA level, and that's useful for a subset of tumors for which there are not targeted therapies for these certain types of fusion proteins.
Thank you. And so when you're doing NGS, what's the platform, if you don't mind sharing? What platform or
even hardware, hardware platform, yeah.
Yeah.
That's all for the clinical assay that we've set up. It's all Illumina based. It's either run on a HiSeq or on a NextSeq. We also have, for example, that FusionPlex assay that I said, that's run on a MiSeq.
Yep.
We also have some research sequencing going on in some of our sequencing cores for if I send something out from research, they have a few additional platforms, but really that's really the main the HiSeqs, the NextSeqs, and to some extent the MiSeqs. That's what's currently being utilized for these clinical assays.
And just have you sent out to Foundation at all?
Great question. So yeah, because at our cancer center we have it in house, there isn't a large volume of send out. I think what differentiates our assay from specifically Foundation assays is that we routinely sequence both normal germline DNA as well as the lesional tumor DNA. So I think our mutation calls are very high fidelity because of that, and we can separate somatic variants, some of which are obviously actionable in terms of cancer risk and family risk, from just the somatic mutations that occur in the tumor. I think that's been one weakness of the Foundation approach. And the other advantage that we have by doing it in-house is that our results are obviously tailored. They prompt typically clinical decision-making more directly, in that we know what inclusion criteria we have for certain clinical trials, for example. So if a patient shows a certain aberration, then we have mechanisms in place by which the clinical team is alerted to that, and then hopefully the patient will be channeled into the right trial or offered, with the options of certain clinical trials that match that person's genomic profile, which is harder to do when you just rely on a third-party provider. But the channels, the panels of all the large providers like Foundation, Caris, and things like that. So I think they're all somewhat similar. Some panels are slightly bigger, some are slightly smaller, but the overall approach, a capture approach, and then sort of an Illumina pipeline is rather similar. There are obviously maybe differences in the informatics pipeline and things like that, but overall I think they're fairly similar approaches. But
and you mentioned
we don't. Yeah, that's why we, as our institute, we don't send out a lot. And even our heme panel, Foundation also has a heme panel. I think most large cancer centers have recognized that for certain tumors, you might want to have a more dedicated panel, and it's primarily the hematologic malignancies where that applies.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, so on that Illumina platform, you mentioned that you're doing also some ctDNA.